This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on rise in India's merchandise exports and the economic growth. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent.
AKB, if you look at the figures for the month of April and then for the month of May, when it comes to the trade data, imports and exports, the trade deficit has only gone up month on month and definitely year on year. What are the principal reasons?
Well, when you are trying to understand trade data, it is probably not fair to just look at the trade deficit data, because trade deficit data will only tell us about our ability to meet the gap over a period of time. Remember that these trade deficit data pertain only to merchandise goods. They don't cover the services exports, and we have very little imports. So whatever may be the trade deficit, that will to some extent impact our overall ability to meet the gap, but that gap by and large is more than met by our services exports. So the point I would like to make is that within the trade data, we should look at both exports and imports segmentally, in a different way. For example, exports growth has decelerated. In May, it was around 21% growth, and in June, it has come down to around 17% growth. And within the exports category, what we do see is that it is largely led by petroleum products, and actually in some of the categories like engineering goods or fabric or yarn or made-ups, plastic, linoleum, they have seen a decline. So therefore, our exports are growing by 16%. There is a deceleration in exports, and we are seeing this export growth of 16% compared to 20% of June, and that too because of higher petroleum product prices. So that is point number one. You look at the imports, what really happens in imports, out of the total component of imports, you have large segment composed of petroleum products once again. So break down the figure of total imports of around 64 billion in June. Out of 64 billion, $20 billion is accounted by petroleum products. Another $6 billion is accounted by coal. Another $2 billion is accounted for by gold. Now, these are the three big items which have actually skewed your import figure. Now, if you did not have a coal crisis at home, you wouldn't have imported so much coal. If the equity markets had behaved more reasonably, then probably people wouldn't have gone in for higher yellow metal import and parked their money there. Similarly, if crude oil prices had not gone up, your import bill wouldn't have gone up to $20 billion for June alone. So therefore, the point I'm making is that yes, our exports have decelerated. Our imports have risen very fast because of these three big items of crude oil, petroleum products, coal and gold. But remember that the core imports, which is non-petroleum and non-gems and jewelry import, have also grown up, and that growth is quite substantial. Now, which means the domestic demand is quite good and quite strong. So that's a very important point that we need to recognize while we are analyzing trade data.
Well, there might be a fourth point also, AKB, about the depreciating rupee to the dollar. How concerned is the central bank about it?
Well, I think the rupee depreciating is actually a good thing for exports. Because when your rupee depreciates, then your exports by and large get more competitive. So I don't think we should look at rupee depreciating in a negative way. Actually, if rupee depreciates, then there is a natural check on imports and your export competitiveness gets better. So what is happening on the rupee front is actually a reflection of our inflation rate and the demand for more dollar, where the demand-supply mechanism is at work. So if the Reserve Bank of India obviously is intervening in the foreign exchange market because it does not want any volatility or sharp depreciation of the rupee. So it is trying to calibrate the fall of the rupee and which is why Reserve Bank of India in the last few months have actually pumped in a lot of dollars. To look at the data from September 2021 and today, Reserve Bank of India's foreign exchange reserves have actually gone down for around $640 billion to almost $590 billion. So Reserve Bank of India is definitely concerned. It is worried that this trade deficit might feed into current account deficit, and if that current account deficit gets out of control, then it may be causing some alarm bells. Right now, we are expecting that the current account deficit will probably go up from around 1.2% of GDP last financial year to around 3.1% of GDP. This is cause for concern, but remember, in the worst of crisis in 2013-14 or 2007-8, we used to have a current account deficit of over 4% of GDP. So we need to be cautious, and the government is obviously taking necessary steps. But let me say why exports have not done well in June. Because of challenges in the global supply chain, there are some bans on exports of India's commodities have been enforced because of domestic shortage fears like wheat. You had supplies of iron ore, some steel products, their exports, and now you have got latest decision is to impose an export duty on petrol and diesel. Therefore, our exports have also suffered. The deceleration has happened because of some of the decisions that have been taken to soften the inflation blow in the domestic economy.
Well, it's not just a cess that is being imposed on petroleum products, once they're refined on the imports, but also there is an increase in the customs duty on the import of gold, which has gone up from 7.5 to, I believe, 12.5% to curb shipments.
Absolutely, you are very right. Because of this excessive love for gold imports, to take an average thing of $2 billion per month, it might end up the year with around $24, $25, $30 billion. Now, this obviously causes two kinds of problems. One is that capital gets locked up in an asset which is actually idle. So your productive returns of your capital is less. And second is the pressure on the government's or the Reserve Bank of India's foreign exchange reserves goes up because people go in, get those foreign exchange from the market, buy it, and import gold by paying hard currency. So in both ways, gold imports need to be discouraged. But how it needs to be discouraged is a matter of debate, whether only imposing a duty on gold import would be good enough, or there should be other macroeconomic measures that need to be taken to discourage people from going in for gold imports and blocking their money in such imports.
Well, AKB, gold is usually purchased by the individual in India to hedge against inflation, and there is so much imported inflation going on for the four factors that we pointed out. You have an import bill consisting of crude oil, the import of coal, coke, and briquettes, gold, and of course, the depreciation of the rupee to the dollar. So how does inflation